In today's episode, we chat with fourth-year pharmacy student Ashna Ramanlal. After growing up in Florida, Ashna made the long trip to California in 2014 to enroll in KGI's first class of pharmacy students. Through part of this interview, Ashna describes how she became interested in scientific communications during her rotation. She also shares news about the fellowship she will start after commencement. Toward the end of this conversation, Ashna mentions her volunteer work with Shepherd's Hope, a Florida-based organization that provides access to healthcare for the uninsured. To begin, I'd like to ask you how you first became interested in coming to KGI.
So while I was in my master's program, the dean of my master's program actually heard about KGI. He was at a conference and he heard about KGI, and he had told me, there's pharmacy school in California that's doing something a little bit different because there's these different avenues of pharmacy that you'll get to experience while you're in school. And at the time, I was like, I'm not going all the way to California from Florida. But I decided to apply just because going through just the brochure and the admissions brochure was so interesting to me. So I decided to apply just so I could learn more about the program. And it wasn't until I came for the interview that I was like, oh my God, these are avenues of pharmacy that, I visited other pharmacy schools that they didn't even touch on. So just having experience in industry, having experience in information technology, there was so many avenues of pharmacy that I was going to get exposed to. And that's why I got really interested in KGI.
You mentioned traveling cross country to come to KGI. What kind of challenges did you have to get through to make that any kind of transition? And did you feel like it benefited you in the long run, or just the unique perspective of coming from Florida to California for graduate school?
Absolutely. I mean, it was definitely a bigger transition than I thought. Interviewing at some of the pharmacy schools in Florida, I felt like the main focus was very clinical and very based on the geriatric population in Florida, which makes a lot of sense. You have to give back to the community and the population of the state. And coming to California, I feel like things are a little bit more innovative and a lot more advanced than other areas in the country, for sure, in terms of different types of education, especially with pharmacy, especially being that, California is one of the first states to give pharmacists prescriber status while I was in pharmacy school. But California is definitely more advanced. Moving across country was not easy, having to find a place. And my first time in California was actually when I came out for the interview. And my second time was just when I moved. So I had to figure out the apartment situation. I shipped my car out. But, being the first class, even though there was not a lot of people on campus already, the administrators were so supportive. It was like I felt like I was moving in with a family before I even started school. Everybody was very supportive on helping us find the area to live in, where are places to go, where are places to eat and find apartments. Everybody was very, very connected right in the beginning, which was really helpful.
The time that you've spent in Claremont and at KGI, what course or maybe a couple courses in particular have really caught your eye and maybe led you to thinking about a part of pharmacy that you're interested in beyond graduation?
Okay, so, KGI, the one thing in our pharmacy school that is different that, I realize that many other pharmacy schools do not do this is in our first year, we get exposure to pharmaceutical industry. All the students in the class get to go to a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company for 10 days to experience what the pharmacist's role is in industry. And that was my first experience, in industry. I didn't know much about it at first, and I was only a P1 at the time. And after that, you kind of are still like on the fence. I was still on the fence. I don't know if this is what I want to do. I need more exposure to it. And the other thing that our pharmacy school does is that we get the certificate program along with our PharmD. So I chose my certificate program in the health operations management with a focus on biopharmaceutical industry. So I took classes in drug pricing. I took a FDA course to learn about the regulations with drugs and devices and how our FDA actually approves these new drugs that come out on the market, which was so interesting to me. And at the time, it's like, you're kind of a sponge and you're just taking in all of this information. And then in the fourth year, I had the opportunity to go to Shire for 6 weeks, and I had already done 3 weeks while Baxalta was transitioning into Shire. And I got to go to Washington, D.C. to the National Organization for Rare Disorders. So I got to apply what I learned in these certificate courses that are so industry focused, that our school focuses on, and the school pharmacy. These classes are with the master's program at our school as well. So I got to work alongside the master's students and learn in these classes. And then I got to apply all of that information when I went to rotations, which was so helpful because I could tell from their standpoint, they were like, wow, you're a pharmacy student, but how do you know all of this? And then when they learned that we learn all of this in our certificate courses, they're really impressed.
And continuing on the topic of rotations, obviously they're a key part of the student experience within KGI School of Pharmacy. Can you describe how those have made an impact on your development?
Absolutely. So, the 10-day experience that I had in my first year was just learning about the different roles of a pharmacist. Before my third year began, I went to Chicago, and I was at the office when Baxalta transitioned into Shire. And at that point, that was my first 3 weeks real experience in medical affairs, which is what I was interested in, but I needed to actually apply myself to some projects to see if I enjoyed the work of the pharmacist and what they do. And I did really enjoy it, but medical affairs is really widespread and there's so many different avenues in it. And so once I started my certificate program and I learned more, I realized I was kind of interested in something called scientific communications. And what a pharmacist's role in scientific communications is to really develop that scientific writing, say presentations that we go out and we educate other health professionals on the drug about, any kind of medical writing that goes into advertising, marketing. That's what the pharmacist's role is. And so when I went to Shire and they asked me what I was interested in, I did tell them medical communications. And so I spent 6 weeks in medical communications. And, I grew to love it. I really did. And so, after my rotations, all of the experience I got from that 6-week rotation, I got to kind of apply when I applied to my fellowships. So when I applied for fellowship this year, I applied for mostly medical affairs with a focus on medical communications. And I was able to kind of talk about all my experiences in my rotation during my interview. So they knew that I had experience in it. They knew I knew the workload and I knew how to do the work based on the projects that I had completed in my rotation.
And looking beyond commencement in May, you talked about the fellowship. What's involved with that opportunity that you have coming up, and how does it fit into your long-term plan for your career?
Absolutely. So I got a fellowship with East Coast Institute for Research, which is based out of Jacksonville, Florida. I interviewed for several different positions, but this one really fit with my goals and where I want to go, like my long-term goals as well. They are a consulting company, so they're not based out of just one pharmaceutical company, but they work with several. It's almost like a consulting. Some of my clients will be AbbVie and also AstraZeneca. Right in the beginning, I'll be working with them. So my position in this fellowship, it's a 1-year fellowship, and it's in scientific communications. And I'll be working on, like I mentioned before, most of the presentations, most of the medical writing specifically. But the nice part about a fellowship is I get a lot of mentorship while I'm in my fellowship. And I also get a teaching component if I'm interested. So my fellowship director is actually a professor at the University of Florida, and he's already offered that opportunity if we are interested in teaching as well at the University of Florida alongside him.
It's tremendous to hear more about that opportunity. And before you get there, I mentioned graduation May 12th at the Sheraton Fairplex. What's going to be going through your mind as you cross the stage and reflecting back on the 4 years at KGI?
Honestly, it's gone by so quickly. I think more than the last 4 years going by really quickly, this past year just flew by. I think last May when I was like, oh my God, we have 7 6-week rotations coming up and I'm terrified. I feel like I don't know anything. But as you go through them, those 6-week rotations just fly by. But I think that I'm actually shocked at how much I do know where I stand now and how much I've really matured in this past year. You think as each year goes on, you do mature and you become more confident. But this is the most confident I felt with all the information that I know. And I'm really proud of the choices I made. I'm really proud to like come to KGI and take that leap. It was hard moving all the way from Florida and leaving my family, but I made such a big family at KGI, and truly I'm going to miss everybody. I'm going to miss Claremont. I mean, I know for everybody, they're like, oh, Claremont's this small town in California. And I'm like, but for me, it was home. I moved away from my family. I lived all alone in my 1-bedroom apartment, but it was home for me. It's where I became independent. It's where I got my education. I'm so proud of Claremont and KGI and everything I built for myself there.
And certainly KGI students have diverse interests. And one question we like to ask on this podcast is, what's something you're involved with outside of KGI that may surprise people, whether it's a hobby, activity, organization?
Absolutely. So one of the things I was actually focused on while I was at KGI was I do YouTube videos for makeup. So I love doing makeup. I love doing my friends' makeup. And so it was sort of like therapeutic for me, but I made YouTube videos on like my favorite products and like how to do certain like makeup looks. And people were shocked at first. Like people were like, wait, we didn't even know that you were on YouTube. And it's not something that's huge. I wouldn't call myself like a YouTube guru or anything, but it's more so for fun for me, And one of the other things that I recently just got involved with is an organization here in Florida called Shepherd's Hope. And it's a volunteer service for physicians, pharmacists, nurses, respiratory therapists, and you work for the underserved community. And that's something I recently just got involved with. I just completed my orientation, and I'll be volunteering every other Wednesday evening. And it's just a volunteer service, and you go and you treat all of these patients. Currently, I'm still doing it as a student, and I'll continue on as a pharmacist. And the reason why I chose to do this was because with my industry and the fellowship, it is not as clinical based. You're not getting as much patient interaction, and I want to continue that patient interaction on some type of level. And so this is my way of still giving back to the community and keeping my clinical knowledge intact.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast, and we'll definitely link the Shepherd's Hope, as you mentioned, towards the end there, so people can check that out. But once again, best wishes in this final stretch in the rotation, and we can't wait to celebrate you and your classmates on both the Sal side and the SOP side. May 12th, the 17th annual commencement for KGI.